Hey guys, it's Tiny Tom Logan back with another video for you, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Superflower Leadex Titanium 1600 watt power supply. Now I don't want to break too much into discussing the ins and outs of the power supply right at the very beginning. We are going to talk about the aesthetics and stuff like that, but I'm going to save a lot of it for the conclusion. Now 1600 watt is an awful lot for a power supply, but one of the things I do want to say right from the very beginning is that my load tester, because I do have a sun moon load tester, so that we can accurately put loads on the power supply, test all the voltage. I've got an oscilloscope for the ripple, which we can kind of see it's hidden behind the back, but there is an oscilloscope there. That's why the laptop's on the top. It's all it does, it's my oscilloscope. So we can effectively place loads, we can work out efficiency, we can see the voltage on the rails, and we can change all types of stuff, which means we can really properly stress the power supply. Obviously, I can only safely go up to 1200 watts, and I'm not willing to push it, although I could do for short bursts. I'm not willing to, risk such a huge investment for testing one of these. Now, people may say to me, well, what's the point? Well, we did test the AX1500i in the exact same way, so we can compare them like for like, especially at that 1200 watt mark. Obviously, like I said, 1600 watts is a lot, but we can discuss more about the kind of 1600 watts and who may need it in the conclusion. But like I said, we can test like for like with the AX1500i. Now I know there's a lot of trolls and fanboys going to be shouting at the screen now about EVGA 600 watt power supplies. Well, I've got a little bit of news for you boys. The 1600 watt EVGA power supply is quite literally just a rebranded Superflower unit. It's not got any EVGA design or anything like that in, bar the external cover. Everything on the inside is Superflower. And a lot of the EVGA, especially the newer EVGA ones, are direct rebrands as well. There's nothing about them that's unique to EVGA. So I just wanted to put that out there before people start going on about it. So we have got a direct 1200 watt like for like with the AX1500i and the 1600 watt Superflower. The interesting thing before we even start the testing is going to be the Superflower is analog and the AX1500i was digital, so I'm actually personally really interested to see how well those two go head to head, in the high wattage analog versus digital stakes. But without further ado, we're going to break in and start looking at some of the things on the power supply itself. Now the cables, first thing, the cables, they are all black. And they are all rather nice as well. You will see that where the ends on the cables, the Superflowers, they used to have red ends on the CPU and red ends on the PCI Express and blue ends on the CPU side. Well, they're now all black on these, which is a really nice thing, and all the cables on the inside are black as well. There's a really nice black braid. It really does. They're very stealthy, understated. They're not shouting for your attention or anything like that. If we look at the top of the power supply, one thing I can say is if you've seen any of the other Superflower units that I've done, they normally have clear connectors on the power supply end, and that's on the power supply itself and on the end of the cables, because on the older ones they light up. They were also patented connectors, which is one of the reasons why so many custom companies like Cable Mod and Pexon I've been having troubles getting hold of those connectors to make you custom cables for your power supply. I can say that this, whether you prefer the light up or not, these are a more generic connector on the ends, which means cable companies are going to find it much easier to make them for you, and it's also going to be much easier for you to change them if you want as well. The only other main thing that we need to point out on the power supply itself is there is an eco and a auto. I had to read it for myself there. An eco and an auto switch, and the eco means it's semi-passive up to a point where it gets a little bit too warm and then it will start to spin the fan up. The auto means the fan pretty much spins right from the very beginning, but will get faster as the heat and the load commences. But that's enough of us talking about it. It's also time for me to have a drink of water, and we can crack on with the actual load testing side of the review. Okay, so the noise you can hear in the background is the load tester itself running. It's a noisy old beast. We've not turned the power supply itself on yet. We can do that quite easily by flicking a couple of buttons. This is our 20% test. This means that we need to, we're putting, as you can see, around 320 watts, 325 watts onto the power supply itself. You can see that by the reading here. The other readings around the outside, this is the voltage going into the unit itself. This is the fluctuation going into the unit, because obviously the electricity goes in hertz. Ours should roughly be about 40 to 50 hertz, but that's that there. But 240 volts. But the most important thing here to look at is the 93.3, 93.4 efficiency rating at the 20%. We can also have a look at the voltage on the rails. We have all of these rails set up, but you can see that we've got a 12.12 on the 20%. The other important factor that we need to test is the ripple, and you will see the one to take most notice of is this one at the top. Now the most we see it go up to at any point is 6.2. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run you through the test so that you can see the live results, so that you can validate all these results and you can see that I've actually taken them, and then at the end I will show you the graphs. So moving from 20% up to 50%, what we can do just with the flick of a button is put the power supply onto a load of 805 watts. We have the fan still set at this present moment in time in the semi-passive mode, and it's not spun up yet. But what we can see from here is we've got the efficiency rating is dancing around the 94.3 to the 94.6 mark, which is pretty much bang on exactly where we would want it. The 94.3 is probably the even amount there. Like I said, it does go up to 6, it does go down to 0, but it does dance around that kind of 3 mark, which is the result that we took. If we take that out, we can then go back to the voltage, and you can see that the volts are all around 12.1, 12.12. It's these ones around the outside that you really want to take the most notice of, because they're the plus 12 volt rails, and they're either the 24 pin or the numerous amounts of PCI Express cables that are on there. Back to the oscilloscope, and you can see again here, this is the one that you need to take the most notice of, and we took a reading for ours on this of 8.6. It does dance around a little bit more, but we found that it was mostly around that. The problem with going for the absolute maximum is you do have to sit there for ages, and the millivolts can vary massively on temperature. So we kind of go for not necessarily the worst case scenario, but a mean result for us on this one. So this is the moment where we go from 800 watts up to 1200 watts. It's a bit of a jump, and there we go. With a flick of a button, we can see that we're putting just over 1200 watts worth of load on the power supply. One thing that I will say is, even with 1200 watts on the unit, it's still in its semi-passive mode. You can see that the fan actually hasn't started running yet. If we were to flick that switch, it would go into the auto mode, and it would, but it's based on temperature, and where we've not really been testing for very long, it's still not started yet. So the main thing on this screen, other than the fact that you can see we've got it just over the 1200 watt load, is the efficiency rating here, 93.4. Only has to be about 93 actually to pass this test, so it is slightly over the requirements for that titanium rating. So our ripple results, and we took a ripple result of 10 for this one. It does go a little bit over, but that's around, again, it's the mean that we took between the lowest, either of the peaks. And again, it does depend on temperature. It can fluctuate a little bit. I don't want to go into too much about that, but our result for this one is 10. So moving briefly on to rounding up our results, we can actually start to look at some graphs, and I wanted to save these to the end because then we get the 20%, the 50% and the 100% all at once, and we can compare it to the other power supplies. So with the graphs, the better result is going to be at the top, and this is the first time in our efficiency tests that the Corsair AX1500i has been slightly bumped down. These are arranged at 50%, because that's where our highest rating would be. That's where we're aiming for that 94%. And you can see that the AX1500i was 94.1, but you've got the Leadex at the top there, which is 94.3. Just to balance it out a bit, with the 100% rating, if we'd done it at 100%, the Corsair would have just pulled in front at that 100% rating. Obviously, one of the things we do have to compare as well is that at 100%, it wasn't 1500 watt and 1600 watt, it was at 1200 watts. If we then move on to our ripple tests, again, the better is going to be at the top. These are sorted by 100%, most stressful result that we would have had. And you can see, but one of the things that I will say about the ripple is the digital power supply, which is the AX1500i, should be at the top. But if you have a look, the analog 1600 watt is actually only slightly just below. When I tested the 650 watt power supply, I was harping on about the ripple, but the ripple with a lower wattage power supply should be significantly lower than some of the other ones. The 650 watt gold was great though. The ripple there was epic. But one of the things I do want to point out is how close the Superflower is to the Corsair in this graph. It's pretty much like 0.4 at very worst. I mean, actually no, on the 20% it was 0.5, but to be 6, 8 and 10 in that, especially running at those kind of wattages as well, is absolutely epic. When we move on to the voltage graphs, what we can see here is this is a bit of a weird graph, because essentially we do want pretty much around and about the 12 volt mark. But power supplies generally do go a little bit above, sometimes a little bit below. If you have a look at the AX1500i, the difference between all of the loads is very, very close. That's going to be our absolute kind of, that really is the point that we, is ideal, really. And that's where the digital kind of side of things really starts to play in. The Silverstone above, you can see we have to sort them by a certain amount. But the Silverstone above being at the top doesn't mean it's necessarily any better. You can see that there is a bit of a spike with the Leadex from the lower end test, so the 20% test. You can see that it's at 12.2, but then when we crank it up, it drops then by 0.1% down to 12.1, and then eventually 12.11 and then 12.1. So there is a bit of a step there from when it's not loaded. So it is putting a little bit more volts through. It's only a small amount, but it is still there. It is still putting a little bit more through. But if we were to compare that, for example, up above to the RM1000, obviously a significantly less priced power supply, but still nonetheless, that one went at 50% up to 12.2, and then when we put it up to 100%, it actually dropped down to 12 dead. So this is one. The results are there. It's something that people like to talk about. I'll be honest, I'm not the Johnny Guru of the YouTube power supply testing world. My knowledge is very basic, so I generally tend to keep my results to the efficiency side of things and then the ripple side of things, because they're pretty damn easy to be able to tell the difference between. I will keep trying to learn and pestering Mr. Guru directly, but those kind of things are going to take a little bit more time because I am still schooling myself on this stuff, but hopefully it will help you in the meantime. Okay then, so moving on to the conclusion itself, and we always do start with the award, so I'm going to give it the OC3D Performance Award. It is still an expensive power supply, 300 quid, but it does deliver obviously a lot of watts, and let's face it, the ripple and the efficiency were absolutely bang on. Now, it's a lot of watts, it is an awful lot of watts. Just to chuck some numbers at you, the only thing that I've tested personally that would actually need this many watts chucking through is two 295s. But if you were going to have two 295s in your rig, you're more than likely going to end up with so many quirky driver problems and stuff like that. It's not likely to be needed. So for the masses, why would you possibly want to have a rig like this when 4 980s only pulls 1200 watts? Well, you certainly... There are a couple of notions with power supplies. One is that do you want to get away with the least amount of power supply watts that you possibly can do to try and save a little bit of money? But then there's another thought, and that's if you have a slightly higher rated power supply, you'll be running closer to that 50% mark. If it's running closer to that 50% mark, then you're going to be in the kind of prime power saving location, whereas you can see on this at 50%, which is 800 watts, which I might kind of like chuck a ballpark figure out for you, would be like a pair of 290Xs. You could probably get about 3 970s in for about 800 watts. But to kind of like chuck that out there, if you were to run this and have it at running at roughly 50%, it would be in its prime efficiency location, and the ripple's pretty damn good as well. Obviously when you're at your desktop, it's going to absolutely plummet, but it could end up meaning with this, because it is semi-passive, and for the Superflowers it's probably the better of the semi-passives that I've seen as well. Obviously I didn't get to run this at 1600 watts, but even at 1200 watts it was sat passive for probably 15 minutes when I did really stress it. And at 800 watts, I think it was close to about 40. It had got to the point that my power supply tester was starting to get a little bit warm, and the room was starting to warm up as well, before the actual unit itself started to put that fan on. It's still not the most tremendous of quiet fans that are in there, but it's definitely a step forward. Also with the power supply connections as well. You're either going to miss those light up connections, or for the most part you may be thinking to yourself that because it's now got a more generic connector on the power supply itself, it's going to open up those abilities for the like I said, PEX-on and CableMod to start offering out of the box options for your power supply cables, and I don't think that can personally be a bad thing. The other side of the 1600 watt side is you could be a bencher and you want extremely clear and lots of power going into your bench rig, and then something like this is never going to be a bad thing. We've mentioned the AX1500i a lot, and to be fair, it's one of the few power supplies out there that's ever going to give this any fair competition. I've mentioned about the EVGA thing, it's just a Superflower, so we don't really even need to kind of talk about that side of things because we're focusing on this one. It's the only things that really differentiate between them, other than that this one is about 50 quid cheaper at overclockers. The only thing that you are going to lose is the digital side of things, which on the actual voltage side of things, and I don't mean the ripple, but the actual volts itself that it's putting out. That side of things is slightly worse than the AX1500i, and you don't get the link. Also, both of them run that semi-passive mode, and in the testing that we've done on this, you can't really differentiate between the two either. So the link is going to be the big thing. So, you know, if you're, as a fair reviewer, if you're looking at a power supply with this much grunt and this much, that the real thing that I can say is price and link. So go and have a look at the link side of things and see if that's going to sway you to pay the extra money. Other than that, the only thing that I can really say about it is the Corsair has obviously got a red label on the side no matter which way you turn it up. This is actually, when you get down to the nitty gritty of it, a much more stealthy kind of hidden design. So rather than it sending you absolutely crazy that you'd need to have everything else in your rig red, with this one you can plug it in and it wouldn't matter whether you're a blue, red, yellow, green, blue, it's not going to matter because there's no massive distinguishing colours on this power supply. So if the link isn't a problem and you want something slightly stealthier and you don't like red, then maybe your choice has just been given to you. So please take all of those items under advisement. As I said, you can find the link underneath to go and have a look at this at Overclockers. And don't forget, it's we have got the titanium one that we've tested here today, but if you want to save a few quid, there are the platinum and the gold versions as well. But also, don't forget, just a small matter, if it says 1600 watt on the label, it doesn't mean it's pulling 1600 watts from the wall at a continuous rate, because that's normally a rule of thumb dad mistake. It's just the power it can deliver in regulations as an absolute maximum, or rather within, you know, it's basically designed for 1600 watt. Doesn't mean it's pushing all of that out. Also, it's a very common misconception to think that you need a 2000 watt power supply, or, you know, whatever else that you want to power it. You can get away with a lot less unless you are aiming for that 50% marker, which I personally think is where this is probably going to be getting marketed at for the bulk of the people out there. You're going to get that, aim for that slightly bit above. It'll almost indefinitely run, except on stupidly hot days, in a semi-passive mode, and be incredibly efficient as well. But for now at least, this is Tiny Tom Logan with his performance review test of the Superflower Leadex 1600 watt titanium rated power supply that's just won the OC3D Performance Award. out. Ding! I'll put this after the main bit because I know there's going to be loads of people asking me what's going on in the background and why is that case there. Well, my main rig is there. This is in the corner of the office. The white case is my personal rig Orca, which I'm going to be sorting out, getting replaced in very soon now because I've got a lot of stuff that's going to be going in it. I've also got my home server just to the right here that needs to be finished pretty quickly soon. So that's why you've got the weird case in the background, because my office isn't enormous.